I brought some water that's a little stronger than Red Bull. My wife, Megan, who's sitting in the audience over here, she said, don't do something lame like start your talk with a joke, because it won't go over very well. It wasn't a rabbi and a priest. 3 rabbis walk into a museum. It's actually not a joke. So 3 rabbis walk into my office about a month ago, and I don't know if Rita Moreno is still here, but they were in a panic. In fact, it turns these gentlemen work for the Orthodox Union. They certify various companies who produce food that is kosher, and the procedures by which the food is declared to be kosher are very, very specific. And there was this alarm in the community in the run-up to Passover that a lot of the sardines and fish eggs and so forth were showing up with worms. And does this mean that the fish product is not kosher or is kosher? And so they came to me, and I'm a parasitologist. In addition to working on leeches, which are parasites, I'm a parasitologist, and they came and they said, can you help us figure this out? And indeed, we can do that. Curators like me at a natural history museum, we're not just dusty people looking at dusty things in dusty jars. In fact, museum curation of biodiversity has come a very, very long way. We now use things like DNA sequences to draw trees. Darwin drew trees. This is what he really looks like. Darwin drew trees. This, in fact, is the very first what we call a phylogenetic tree ever drawn. It was in The Origin of Species. Ours are a little more complex now, using lots and lots of species DNA sequence data. This is taken from David Hillis, who spoke last year. It was David, his brother, who spoke last year. In fact, all 3 of them spoke last year. And we can take a DNA sequence data, like you see at the top there, and do basically what we call barcoding, and figure out how that sequence is related to other things and, in fact, identify it. And this is what they came to my office to do. Of course, I work on leeches, which is how it's been advertised for you. I won't let you down. That is my hand, and that is a leech, European medicinal leech feeding on my hand. Most people think that the medical use of leeches is something that is fairly medieval in terms of its practice, although it does go back, well back to things like Hippocrates and Galen. In fact, it was much, much more common and reached its zenith, if you will, in the 1800s under one of Napoleon's surgeons, a gentleman by the name of Broussais. He thought, why not use leeches for bloodletting instead of slicing veins open, because no one's ever died from a leech bite, and we can't say the same thing for slicing veins open. In fact, the use of leeches in the 1800s was so popular. Broussais, for example, used about 500,000 leeches. Here we go, about 500,000 leeches in one hospital alone in Paris. And because of this, leeches are responsible for the origins of the animal conservation movements in the Western world, because the sheer over-extirpation of these led various countries to put in place regulations and controls on exportation and collecting. In fact, William Wordsworth's poem, The Resolution and Independence, is also known as a leech gatherer, because there's an individual in there who is lamenting the loss of leeches in the moors. In terms of leeches in popular culture, there's not a lot of children's books about leeches. Edward Gorey managed to sneak one into the Gashly Crumb Tinies. And I think if you think about what your particular notion of a leech is, it's probably driven a lot by popular media.
Out of the swamp's depths appears horrifying, mysterious creatures.
The little beggars. If there's anything in the world I hate, it's leeches. Oh, the filthy little devils.
Leaving a very sick boy.
Leech! Leeches! Oh my God! Oh my God!
Well, that's Will Wheaton before he was Wesley Crusher. So I think people's impressions of leeches are fairly biased by what they experience either in the wild or what they see in the media. I'm going to try to convince you that leeches are actually quite useful. I managed to convince one individual, Mr. Leiden here, when we were doing some work in Louisiana, and I'll try to do the same for you. So in Southeast Asia and in Indonesia, you can buy leech oil. It's an incredibly useful product. You can get a bottle for about 15 bucks on the internet now. It has a very specific use for enhancing things. Let's just say you have alternatives, but they're more painful. Leeches were actually approved by the US Food and Drug Administration as only the second animal to be useful as a medical device. And indeed, this was developed by a couple of Slovenians in the 1960s. The idea goes like this. A guy chops his finger off with an axe, presumably accidentally. And then now we have microsurgery. You can reattach arteries and other tissues, ligaments and tendons. But you can't sew the veins back together because veins are very, very thin-walled. And one physician explained to me that it's sort of like sewing two wet soda crackers together. So once you've done that, you've effectively opened up the spigot into a balloon that's going to fill up with blood, and that tissue then needs time for the veins to grow back in and restore circulation. Without that removal of the pressure, the veins won't do that, the tissue will rot, and it'll fall off, and all that very expensive surgery will be for naught. So what you can do is put leeches on that tissue, flap tissue, a reattached digit, for example, and there's a leech feeding on that tissue right there. For this individual, over the course of 6 weeks, that was done and got almost perfect restoration of circulation and the ability to use that finger. Another example here, a gentleman, a guy who had his ear bit off by a dog. You ever notice it's always a guy, you know? And leeches have been attached to this piece of tissue over the course of several weeks, and he's got his ear back, and it works just fine. So leeches are useful in that regard. They're also pretty. So this idea of a dark, slimy, wormy thing that has no aesthetic value, I think I can dispense with that. If we could dim the lights just a little bit, the colors are actually quite dramatic. This is the European medicinal leech of bloodletting infamy. This is its cousin from Eastern Europe with the lovely emerald and ruby checkerboard patterns. This particular species here, all done up in Christmas tree colors, is in fact feeds exclusively from the nares of ducks. This is an African medicinal leech. Some of the most beautiful leeches I've ever seen are actually marine leeches. These are leeches that don't mind salt, obviously. This particular, both of these here, and in fact this lovely guy, feed on sharks and skates and rays. The one in the middle with these frilly things, and we don't know what those frilly things do, feeds on marine sea turtles. This is the North American medicinal leech, here with those beautiful orange polka dots and the red belly. Because of that distinctive marking pattern, we know that this was tapped by the Osage Indians in their creation myth. I could go on and on about leeches and creation myths. This is how they feed. So medicinal leeches have three muscular jaws with a tiny row of teeth, and this is inside of their mouth. They use those jaws to make an incision in your skin, and they apply negative pressure with a sucker, leaving you with this very prestigious Mercedes-Benz mark. They inject anticoagulants, of course, which cause you to bleed afterwards. They don't really do that so that you bleed. They do that so that the blood inside them, which they fill up to about 8 times their unfed body weight, so that it doesn't coagulate and they don't turn into a brick, in which case they couldn't swim around, escape from predators, or have sex. Leeches are hermaphrodites, so they give as good as they get when they're doing this. Some of my favorite leeches, and as you see with this beautiful metallic green racing stripe, are the terrestrial leeches. So people who are from Southeast Asia, Eastern Australia, Indian subcontinent, and so forth. Leeches are more common in a terrestrial environment like this little guy here, and this is me in Madagascar collecting them. Quite beautiful, 10 eye spots going across the front of their head, all the better to see you with. And as you walk by, it's really quite unnerving to have 100 of these sort of on the trail going like this as you're going by. So with that, taking this iconic image of conservation, I thought, maybe, like Douglas Adams said, even just the loss of a leech species might make this place a colder, darker world. I'm not sure if I've convinced you.
I'm going to raise it and care for it so the world will forever know what it's lost. Ah, you freaking slime wad! No, I killed it. It was the last of its kind. And let go of me, you poor thing.
I think, I don't know if Matt's up yet, but I think Mr. Graining probably captured the conflicted nature of leech conservation best. So this raises an issue. How is it that we actually go and collect leeches in the wild? And this indeed is what we do. This is in Madagascar, wandering around in the jungle. It's generally not a good idea to wander around in jungles with no shoes and socks on, but this is how we do it. This is usually it's a fairly remote place, in this case in French Guyana, although we've been in Australia and Rwanda and so forth. It involves rolling your pant legs up, wearing sandals in case there's nasties in the water, and wading into a swampy wetland area with unknown things underneath the surface, wiggling your legs around. This is actually very important, the wiggling bit. And the reason is that leeches have mechanical receptors all over their body. And from many, many meters away, they can detect first the movement in the water and be attracted to that from some distance before they actually come closer to you. You'll find them on the undersides of logs, and indeed we need to periodically get our legs out of the water and look for leeches attached to us. I owe Discovery Channel a debt for this because this is taken from Nasty by Nature that was on the channel last year. This is a giant Amazonian leech. That's actually a small one. They get as big as your forearm. We attract quite a bit of attention in the field in local communities, and part of my job as an educator is to try to share what we're doing and why we're doing it with people, why biodiversity is important. Unfortunately, with leeches, the response is universal, yes. There are a lot of dangers associated with doing biological field work where you're wandering around in water. I won't go through a lot of what they are. I'll just allude to them with a few photographs. Anyone want to go camping with me? But the thing that I'm actually really terrified of when we're in Africa is one particular animal, and that's hippopotamuses. Unfortunately, there's a leech that feeds exclusively from the rectal area of hippopotamuses. And that's because the rectum of a hippopotamus is the only place that's heavily vascularized and doesn't have big, thick skin on it, and leeches aren't stupid, so they're feeding from there. They're incredible parents. This is one here, has about 100 youngsters on its underside. When that parent then goes to its, don't go, ooh, this is parental care. This is better than dinosaurs. It's taking its young to their first blood meal when it goes and gets its next blood meal. So we needed to get this leech for some of the research we were doing on bacterial symbioses. That's a whole other story. And don't let the smile on a hippo fool you. Hippos kill more people in Africa than crocodiles, snakes, and so forth, all other vertebrates combined. And the reason is behind that smile is a pair of extremely sharp incisors that can just slice you right in half. When you go and you do this sort of collecting in Kruger Park, you need a guide with you who's armed. I did ask him whether or not he's ever had to use his rifle. He said, no, thank goodness. I said, well, so what would you do? You'd shoot the hippo. And he said, do you see the caliber on this? That wouldn't do anything to a hippo. And I said, well, what's it for, to scare it away? He says, no, if a hippo gets you in its teeth, I might want to shoot you. And we did, actually. There was a park ranger who heard that we were doing this work, and he said he was off. They had to cull a hippo that was violating somebody's rhododendrons too many times. And they're not endangered, but they do get into communities, and they can be quite dangerous. So they had to kill this hippo, and he remembered that these crazy Americans, although I'm Canadian, these crazy Americans are wandering around looking for this hippo butt leech. And he had the presence of mind. He pulled out his Bowie knife, carved it out, threw it in a jar. This is hippo butt. This is a piece of hippo rectum. There's the parent, and look at all the little babies that have crawled off. And this is what it looks like. Placobduloides Jaeger skildi. And that's the hematoma that it left. So now you know why hippos are so ornery. So you recognize with that, it's actually more dramatic this way. Leeches that feed on mammals are actually quite rare. Most leeches feed on frogs and turtles and crocodiles and things like that. Occasionally, people will be infested, if you will, by leeches. And this is an example. This is Dinobdelopherox, literally the terrible, ferocious leech from Southeast Asia. This was in India. And this individual presented in a doctor's office, obviously with great eye irritation and interrupted vision, one supposes. It's holding on by its sucker back here on the eyeball. Stephen yesterday morning mentioned that he had these x-rays of his head, and the first thing the doctor wanted to do was go show it to somebody. And so I'm thinking, when I'm looking at this picture, this guy is like got to be totally freaked out. There's blood coming out of his eye, and there's a leech in there, and what does the doctor do? He says, wait a minute, let me get my camera. Well, it turns out that mammals being infected by leeches happens in a lot of different places. This is one coming out of the nose of some poor dog in Southeast Asia. We're not getting very far with leech conservation, are we? This is awesome. This is an ultrasound of a leech swimming in someone's bladder. This sort of work actually came to my attention because there was a physician in Peru. There were all of these cases of children getting these massive headaches, and they were finding leeches in the nasal passages of these kids. There's one there in the back of it. This is the orthoscope thing. That's not the leech. This is the leech down here. And you'll see it'll be pulled out. We got to look at these things, and it was a whole new species, a new genus. This is what they look like. Not only were they in the nose, this was a leech that had the largest teeth ever recorded. Instead of 100 tiny little denticles on the jaw, there were 8 huge, massive, sharp teeth. So no wonder it hurt. We decided we would give it an appropriate name, which was Tyrannobdella rex, so that we could say that T. rex is alive and well feeding on children in the Amazon. It places up here, everything in yellow here, it turns out, is a mucous membrane feeder of mammals. So here's how an evolutionary tree comes into play. We now learn something new. This isn't just a random happenstance. From the evolutionary tree, from the phylogeny, we see this is something that evolved a very, very, very long time ago in the history of leeches. So people are particularly interested in leeches, of course, because of the anticoagulants and bloodletting. The giant Amazonian leech was responsible for that mess over there. And the way they do this is with anticoagulants, with these salivary peptides that they secrete into the wound, as I said, so that their blood meal doesn't turn into a brick inside of them. There's several of them. This anastasin also has anti-cancer properties. Hiridin is responsible for the very first successful human dialysis treatment ever by a guy named Jorg Haas in 1923, before heparin was available. He used hiridin to line the tubing. Decorsin is one from the North American medicinal leech. What we also can do with an evolutionary tree is look and see where did they evolve. Because not all the leeches are using the same thing. There's this huge diversity, and instead of using model organisms, look at the diversity, look at the salivary anticoagulants, and where did they originate? So for example, hiridin originated here, some of the others back here. We can even look at the rates of evolution in the amino acids in the proteins, this is hiridin, and find out which ones can't ever change in the entire evolutionary history of that molecule. And there are several here, and others that are under Darwinian selection, for example. One of the things that I get to do, and one of my curiosities, goes back to all the food that we've been talking about. I get to see how people use invertebrates and other food in different places in the world. This is in Incheon, China. This is just wandering through markets. There are about 7 different invertebrate phyla in that bucket alone. About 75% of the world actually gets most of its protein from insects.
Oh, crunchy.
Yeah, it was crunchy. Megan, who can I use my fingers?
Uh-huh.
Sitting in the office. This is great. Live octopus does sauce itself. And then, Megan is my guinea pig sometimes for guinea pig. This is Megan.
I don't ever have to eat that again.
It's a real trooper. Actually, yesterday we were out at Point Lobos, and I was showing her the gooseneck barnacles and the periwinkles and the limpets and various other things crawling around. Megan's first comment was, wow, you could eat pretty well here. So the rabbis, bringing this back full circle and maintaining the food theme. It turns out that using the technology that we have at the museum, for example, these are the worms that we pulled out of some of them. It's not one species. but in fact 4 different species of worms running around in the flesh of these canned fish and so forth. But they are kosher. And if anybody would like to know why, I'll explain that out at one of the breaks. Thank you very much. No, I won't. I was going to pull them out.
That's okay.
Going great?
Nope, that's okay. You just